This video is brought to you by MoviePalette.com and enter ROOM15 for 15% off of your palette. Hey horror fans, welcome back to 237, back with another review. As I continue my run through of films based on real life serial killers, and yes, this is yet another Ted Bundy film. There's so many Bundy films. But this is one that I've actually already reviewed. I reviewed this 3 years ago when this first came out. And I was lucky enough to find a DVD of it, because Netflix doesn't like to put their stuff out. But I think this was a release from overseas because it's a Region 2 DVD. I do have a Region 3 player, so I was able to rewatch it, even though it's still on Netflix. But I'm a sucker for physical media, so I just really wanted to own this. And I wanted to review it. I wanted to watch it again and see how my thoughts were on it now, 3 years later. But I also just wanted to re-review it sort of with this format that I've been doing with these serial killer films. And of course, it is the 2019 Zac Efron Ted Bundy movie, Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile. Yes, very glad to finally have this on DVD. I do remember when this first came out. It was only 3 years ago, but I think there was a lot of delays with it. This was a movie that I followed pretty extensively. I remember when this was first announced. I remember when Zac Efron was first announced, which I will admit I wasn't crazy about when I first heard it, because I didn't really know him as an actor outside High School Musical at that time. So I was thinking, oh, they're gonna make not sparkly, but they're just gonna make a hot Bundy. Great, so all these High School Musical girls are just gonna be thirsting over Bundy. If only I knew what was gonna happen later on with other serial killer films. But then I remembered that actually works, because back in the 70s, Bundy was considered attractive, charismatic. He had a bunch of groupies or admirers when he was on trial. So you kind of have to cast someone who is good looking. But Efron is a good actor. I've come to really like him as an actor, and he's definitely the best part about this film, aside from just the historical accuracy, which you really have to hand to the director, which I'll get into. And really what sold me before I saw it was the internet first posted a promotional picture of Efron as Bundy recreating one of his Salt Lake City mugshots with the plain white t-shirt. And I thought, wow, this guy looks just like him already. This is going to be the Bundy movie to see. And then I remember when I first saw it, I did really enjoy it. I did learn some things from it. I had far less books on Bundy and stuff at that time. But one of the criticisms that I remember was people complaining that it didn't show any of the murders. It didn't show Efron actually killing anybody. And at the time, I kind of agreed, and that's another reason why I wanted to rewatch this. Because even though I thought the film was good and handled well, especially with the approach that they take, it's not about the murders. This is not a Life of Ted Bundy movie as a serial killer. It's really more, well, it's based on the book The Phantom Prince, My Life with Ted Bundy by his former girlfriend, Liz Kendall. Well, she wrote it as Liz Kendall. She goes by Kendall in this, but that's her pseudonym, because she faded from the public eye after '81 when this came out. Her real name is Klepfer, Liz Klepfer. So it's really through her eyes, or at least the first half is. And then the second half is more of just everything that's in public record, things that everyone else knows, or everything that the public saw. So it really kind of treats the audience like we're around back then. It's trying to portray, it's really highlighting the intelligence, the charisma, the charm of Ted Bundy and how so many people could believe that he could be innocent. It's kind of trying to portray this more so what if kind of possibility. Like we don't see any of the murders at least until like very just a few seconds at the very end do we see a recreation of I think it's supposed to be Donna Manson, his victim Donna Manson. And looking back now, I think it's because a lot of people, again, I mentioned this before. I mentioned it with the 2016 Night Stalker film, uh, the TV movies like the To Catch a Killer about Gacy, uh, several other films I mentioned it, where I think it's just surface level or face value true crime fans that essentially just want to see how disturbing or how messed up a real life person was or is. They don't really care about the story or any factual events. So this is another one of those films that will separate the face value fans and the true crime enthusiasts that really care about the story and come at a more educational uh, approach. But I do think this approach works. And as I said in my last review, which is still up, you can check that out. There's numerous movies that you can see. I mean, if you want to see Bundy actually killing someone, go watch the 2002 film with Michael Riley Burke. Or the one with Corin Nemec. I mean, that shows him killing people. Those are essentially like slasher films. Those are exploitation films. This is a more realistic, and I do like how, it takes the approach of treating the audience like they were someone at home watching the trial back in the 70s. It's really Efron's performance, like it was Bundy's performance back then, to make you believe that he's innocent. And I really like that. It doesn't come out and say, yes, he's guilty, up until the last few seconds of the film, which is really historically makes sense because that was really when Bundy started confessing, was just days before his execution, hoping to buy more time. That was when he finally started to say, okay, yes, I am guilty. This is how I did it and to who. So, structurally and just the way it approaches the story is probably the best way possible. I mean, it's very close to real life. Not just the things that they do and things that they get accurate, but also done in the way that really the only people that knows what it looks like and what he did is Bundy himself. But the fact that it doesn't show us up until right before his execution, which we don't see, makes sense to real life. So I do applaud the film for willing to do that. I know there's still going to be surface level face value people that wish that they could have seen him kill people. Although I do agree with I still agree with something I said in my last review, and I said this for, again, the 2016 Night Stalker film and a few others, that when it does show Efron as Bundy killing one of his victims, the way he looks, with hair and costume, and just the way it's portrayed and the way it's executed, looks so good. And it looks so close to what it probably looked like. That's probably the closest we'll get to see on film a Bundy murder. That part of me does find it's not as frustrating as it was when I last saw it, but it still is kind of like, I do kind of wish I could see that movie. I do wonder what that movie would be like. But I still applaud this film's approach. And also, where it's based on this book, it does have to kind of show itself through the eyes of his girlfriend, who didn't really see anything anyway. And side note, I do highly recommend this book. This is a very intimate, tell-all, very, very good. I'm actually still in the process of reading it, about halfway through. It does leave a lot out. It does kind of a dilute the character of Liz a tiny bit. It kind of just makes her the loyal to a fault, uh, living with guilt of giving his name to police, and drowning herself in alcoholism. It doesn't go as in depth as the book does, and it really just kind of limits her to just someone watching the trial at home in the second half. The second half becomes more of a biopic, more about Bundy's escapes and his trials and just the circus of a trial that he had, him being his own attorney, uh, everything he did with Carol Ann Boone, like proposing to her. So Liz kind of becomes a secondary part of the story in the latter half. But again, and I still will say, yes, I do think it was the best approach to not show him as a killer up until that final moment when he finally confesses to Liz, because that was when he actually started confessing. In fact, when she leaves, that's when these detectives start coming in and he starts confessing. So it's really like, in the context of the film, he's telling Liz, he's telling us at the same time he's confessing to all these detectives. So that works. I went on for that about 10 minutes. So, one reason why you can expect it to be, very historically accurate is because it's directed by Joe Berlinger, who, he's a documentary filmmaker. He's the one that directed the Ted Bundy tapes, also on Netflix, which I am also proud to finally say it's not a bootleg. It's some sort of special release. I think only so many were made, but I found a copy on eBay. They usually go for over $100. I found it for like 50, and so I snagged it. It's on its way. It should be here next Monday. Very glad to finally own that. Can't wait for that to get here. The screenplay was by Michael Werwe, if I pronounce that correctly, and he based his screenplay on The Phantom Prince. Efron actually served as a producer also. I think this might have been a bit of a pet project for him. I did read that he was apprehensive at first because he didn't want to glorify the killer, which it doesn't. It doesn't glorify serial killer Ted Bundy. If anything, it kind of just... If it glorifies anything, it might be the public showman that he was when he was on trial. But then when he saw that it's all about his charm and charisma and trying to win over the world with his life, or for his life, that's what attracted him to the project. And they recreate several things. I mean, all the way down to the wardrobe or the hair, the beard. I mean, of course there's several mugshots, like the one from Salt Lake City. They recreate that. His Glenwood prison interview, where he's got the brown turtleneck and the beard, which is there's one Glenwood Springs, excuse me. March 17th of 77, his Glenwood Springs interview, where he's got the brown turtleneck and the beard. A lot of those lines are verbatim. A lot of his mannerisms and things he does with his eyes or his eyebrows, the way he looks around, very accurate to that actual interview, which you can find on YouTube. Also, his first escape, where he's wearing that striped cardigan, that's depicted very close to real life. I mean, he looks just like him. So they really do a good job with making Efron look like Bundy. I will say he doesn't sound like him. He still sounds like Zac Efron. If you close your eyes, it still sounds like Efron. And I mean, not really any of them sounded much like Bundy. I'll say maybe Corin Nemec and Luke Kirby from No Man of God, which I still need to review. I will say that Lily Collins she does a good performance as Liz, even though they really kind of I don't want to say dumb down her character, but they really limit her what she is. I mean, just turning her into this guilty drunk, essentially. She doesn't really look like Liz, but she does have sort of this small, petite figure that she's a lot like Liz, just not much in the face. The one that really impressed me, though, was Kaya Scodelario, if I pronounced that correctly. Her as Carol Ann Boone. Her performance is really good, but she really looks like Carol Ann Boone. I mean, I don't know if it's just the glasses or what, but they did a good job at making her look like Carol Ann Boone. And her performance is really good. That's something I can kind of say about everybody in this film. Everybody does a good job. Haley Joel Osment plays this guy Jerry, who I do know he's a made-up character for the film. He's supposed to represent one of the supporting friends that Liz had after Ted was finally sentenced or going through trial. The reason why they made him sort of a love interest is to kind of be this character that will pull her out of that sort of Bundy abyss that she's stuck in. He does a good job. Jim Parsons as the prosecutor in Florida. Yes, he sounds a lot like Sheldon. It is almost like Sheldon being a prosecutor. And John Malkovich as Judge Edward Cowart, the judge in Florida. Yes, he still sounds like John Malkovich. But must I remind you, this is a capital murder case. He doesn't sound like Judge Cowart or really look like him. But I love Malkovich and everything he's in, so he's awesome. There was a big deal on the internet about James Hetfield being cast as the arresting officer in Salt Lake City. He's really in one scene. He's not a major player in it, but it is cool to see James Hetfield play a cop in a serial killer movie. Probably the most metal thing he's done since before 1990. I'll say that. Brandon Tross did the cinematography, and Marco Beltrami did the music. Now, it premiered at Sundance in January 26, 2009. 19, excuse me. I was trying to do the math in my head, which January 15th was the 45th anniversary of his first murder, and I think the 31st anniversary, the 41st anniversary of the Chi Omega murders. So it was just 11 days past that anniversary. But I think it premiered on Netflix May 3rd, and it got mixed reviews, but I think this is one of the better Bundy movies. Like, it might be a tie with The Deliberate Stranger with Mark Harmon. I might say this is better made. Of course, yeah, it's got that polished sort of Hollywood look. It definitely looks good. It's definitely shot well. I mean, it's made by a documentary filmmaker. I feel like they do have a good eye for certain things. Very well acted across the board, and extremely accurate. I mean, if I had titles for these reviews, I would call it extremely accurate. Very, very little is false. I mean, it's probably one of the most accurate Bundy films out there. It's not as thorough as, say, The Deliberate Stranger, but... And I know one of the criticisms was a lot of really what they're doing is sort of creating this almost 2-hour dramatization of, especially in the second half, everything that we see in the Ted Bundy tapes, because I know that came out first. And yeah, there are a lot of scenes where you can literally put them side by side. I mean, his Glenwood Springs interview, the whole I'll plead guilty, I'll plead not guilty right now press conference in Florida. I mean, the mannerisms, the way everyone moves around, the verbatim lines. It looks meticulously recreated from you know a public record footage that any true crime person has seen. Uh, I did not see The Disaster Artist when I first saw this, but I've seen it since. And during the end credits, they do put a lot of the footage that they recreated, like the actual Bundy footage that they recreated in the end credits. The Disaster Artist actually puts them side by side in the end credits. This doesn't go that far, but it still puts the original footage. And I still think it does kind of have that feeling of, see how close we did? Like, see how good we did? See how close we made it to the real thing? I don't quite feel that as much as I did 3 years ago, but it still kind of has that feeling. But I still think it's a very solid film. And definitely one of the better Bundy movies. Now, as I've said before, for a lack of a better term, Bundy has always been my favorite serial killer. If I had a top 5 or a top 10, Bundy's always been my number 1. I've always found him the most fascinating. I mean, so many things in his life and things that he did, like escaping twice, serving as his own attorney, proposing to someone on the witness stand. So many things that he did. Killing 2 separate women in the same day from the same place. He almost sounds like a movie character, like someone you have to make up. But in the fact that he's so synonymous with the term serial killer, and actually a lot of people believe, and it's been pretty consistent. I think in 1981 the term serial killer was first used. And I think it was, and a lot of people think or seem to agree, it was first used to describe Bundy. So I would say Bundy is probably the serial killer story that I'm most well versed in. That's probably the one I know the most of out of all of them. Because, I mean, and I've showed these before. I mean, I have his Ted Bundy tapes book. I got this encyclopedia, which written by Kevin Sullivan. He's actually written a handful of Bundy books that I would love to get. Probably the most definitive Bundy book, Stranger Beside Me by Ann Rule. And then just this sort of... this is kind of one of those books that I think has information that you could find anywhere else. On top of the Phantom Prince, which is very good. Also, like the 24 big encyclopedic books I've shown almost 24 times at this point. I've also got about a dozen Time, Life, and Globe magazines on serial killers. On top of the numerous documentaries I've seen of Bundy. So while I was watching this, I was marveling at, because a lot of times they have to change names or tweak events in such a way. But this was one of the first times where the names were actually there. I mean, they mentioned the 2 girls from Lake Sammamish, Denise Naslund and Janice Ott. They mentioned the Chi Omega girls that were murdered, Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman, his final victim Kimberly Leach, Karen Campbell from the ski resort in Colorado. It gets all the dates right whenever something major happens, like his escapes or anytime he's transferred or sentenced. So, I am a huge sucker for accuracy, and I would say that this one does get the most right. But at the same time, I do kind of see why some people might be disappointed and just see it as a dramatization of everything Joe Berlinger put in the Ted Bundy tapes. Yeah, it doesn't really offer much new to the Ted Bundy story. I mean, a lot of it is kind of stuff you already know. But I do kind of like seeing it from someone else's perspective. Like, you just kind of hear things on the TV or police talking about it, and you kind of see Liz's reaction to it, which is a lot of what the Phantom Prince book is like. So I really do like this kind of pedestrian, or not really voyeurism, but sort of audience member look to it, as it really puts us back in the 70s and being an outsider looking in like people were back then. So I will say it's probably the best Bundy movie since The Deliberate Stranger. I'm not sure which one is better though. I did say The Deliberate Stranger was when I reviewed that. Rewatching this, I do kind of see the same issues everyone has, but I still really appreciate how well made, well acted, and how accurate that it is. So I know I've done this a few times already for Bundy, but I've kind of gotten in the habit of doing this every time anyway. So just sort of a brief or somewhat brief kind of clip notes on Ted Bundy. He was born Theodore Robert Cowell on November 24th, 1946, and he killed at least 30 young women between January 15th of 1974 and February 9th of 1978 across 7 states between Washington, Oregon, Utah, Idaho, Colorado, and finally Florida. He would often feign an injury and struggle with a fake cast or crutches and books, and when young women would offer help, he would then club them with a crowbar, abduct them in his Volkswagen Bug, drive to a remote location, usually the Taylor Mountains in Washington, and he would then sexually assault them, and then often bludgeon them or sometimes strangle them. He would sometimes return to these dump sites to have sex with the corpses, and he also admitted to saving up to 12 heads. In 1975, he was stopped for driving erratically, and his, quote, kit was found, including crowbar, ski mask, pantyhose with eye holes, rope, duct tape. And he was then put in a lineup for the failed abduction of Carol DaRonch in Salt Lake City on November 8th, 1974. This was months after the, quote, Ted murders had begun, when the only lead they had was a guy named Ted in a Volkswagen Beetle. So he then went on trial for the Carol DaRonch abduction. He was sentenced for 1 to 15 years, but on... sorry, I got ahead of myself. But he ended up escaping twice. The first time was from a second-story courthouse window in Aspen, Colorado on June 7th of 77, where he was free for 6 days. And then again on December 23rd, 77, climbing through a light fixture in his cell. In the nearly 2 months of his freedom, he made it all the way to Florida, where he attacked and killed 2 women and badly injured 3 at the Chi Omega sorority house, then injured another woman just blocks away. This was on January 15th of 78. Then on February 9th, he committed his final murder, 12-year-old Kimberly Leach. He was soon picked up and sentenced to death for the Chi Omega murders on July 24th, 1979, and later sentenced to death for Kimberly Leach on February 10th of 1980. He was executed on January 24th of 1989 in Florida's electric chair. He denied his guilt up until his final days. At that point, he finally confessed up to 30 murders. Many believe it was just to save himself and to delay his execution. He was known for his handsome looks, his charm, his charisma, and his intelligence, and his status as a law student and being active in politics, which helped his image and why he wasn't immediately a suspect in the, quote, Ted murders. His name has become synonymous with the term serial killer, even believed to be the first murderer to have the term used to describe him as early as 1981. His looks, intelligence, his status, and wide range of geographic attacks led many profilers to rethink their approach to how to profile a killer. Some believe, and according to Bundy himself, his total body count may be at least 100. So now we come to the film itself, and it's kind of bookended with the final meet between Liz and Ted, which says it's days before his execution. Now, it's not known if she ever visited him in prison, but in the beginning of the film, she asks him, "Do you remember how we met?" Then at the very end, she says, "You need to tell me the truth if you did these things." Now, they did have a similar conversation where he did confess to her, but it wasn't in prison. It wasn't, at a visitor's glass. It was actually over the phone. That's one of the very few things actually that it changes. So then we see the night that they met, which was at a bar. It doesn't say the Sandpaper Tavern, but that's where it was. It shows Bundy approaching Liz, where actually it was the other way around. She noticed him, then approached him. And that was in Seattle. And actually, it does leave a lot out from this book. I mean, the movie plays it off like she never noticed anything. She only gave his name to police after the Lake Sammamish attack, or abduction, where he took strangers to each other 2 separate times, 4 hours apart, Denise Naslund and Janice Ott. And then the composite sketch of Ted came out. His name was Ted and drove a Volkswagen Beetle. That was when she gave his name to police, just on that. In real life, she noticed some plaster of Paris. She noticed some women's underwear that weren't hers. Some keys, a knife under the front seat of his car. The movie doesn't really show any of that, nor does it show, the movie shows Ted just being this doting, loving boyfriend to her almost throughout, whereas, they had many fights over him being a thief, which the movie doesn't go into at all. Some of the threats that Ted made, at one point he even threatened to break her fucking neck when she brought up him stealing. And he did share a story where he closed up her chimney one night and started a fire, hoping to burn the house down with her in it. So the movie doesn't really show the rocky parts of their relationship, and really just limits to, her calling the police just because his name's Ted, drives a Volkswagen. That's it. When, according to the book, she called several times. And then after the whole Carol DaRonch thing, she became more acquainted with the police. I'm only about halfway through now. He's actually on bail in Colorado, awaiting the Carol DaRonch trial. That's where I am in this. So it doesn't go fully in depth to their relationship, which as an adaptation of the book, that might be a bit of a detriment, and that's why I feel it kind of abandons the Liz Kendall portion about halfway through when we get into his trial. But it immediately, it shows how they met. They went to bed together, didn't have sex, but went to bed together. Woke up, found him cooking and having her daughter Molly already in her high chair, and she fell in love immediately. I think all the news footage is authentic. I think it's all from the 70s, all from that time. But the news mentions that between January and July, 7 girls have gone missing. The last one being Georgianne Hawkins. That's true. She was, I believe, the 7th. Is mentioned. And then we have mention of Lake Sammamish with Denise Naslund, Janice Ott, which is true, and the timeline and order of the victims are true. Then we see him in Utah of 75 when he gets pulled over by James Hetfield. Just shows pictures of his rape kit. It does show that he has it. It shows that he has the bag of stuff in his car, which, as far as the film goes, that's the most guilty he looks up until the very end. And again, I like that approach for this film. It shows the Carol DaRonch lineup where he's number 7 wearing a turtleneck, which is true. him being followed or on surveillance while on bail in Seattle. That's true. Even him going up against this one cop asking, who are you? Why are you following me? Sentence for the Durant case. True. Which they didn't say 1 to 15 years, but it shows him arriving at Utah State Prison March 1st of 76. I do believe that was the date. We're introduced to Mike Fisher, the lead detective on the Ted case for Utah. Or Colorado. And, it's Colorado. And, shows that he's going to be extradited to Colorado for the murder of Karen Campbell on January 12th of 75, which was his 19th overall victim, I believe. So it shows him arriving at the Wildwood Inn. Oh, excuse me, the Wildwood Inn was where he killed her. I've got my notes all messed up. So then it shows the March 17th, 1977 Glenwood Springs prison interview where he's got the brown turtleneck and the beard. And again, a lot of the lines are verbatim. Like the guy asks if he's guilty, and he's like, you asked me if I'm guilty? Yeah, guilty of stealing a comic book when I was 5 years old. And then the whole, I'm tired of people looking at me like I'm a weirdo, because I'm not. And him just kind of looking back at the camera and just smiling. Look, he's got a lot of the same mannerisms. He's already got these pretty intense blue eyes already. So he's able to channel that sort of soulless eyes that Bundy has. So whenever they're recreating stuff like that, I really do feel Efron's kind of disappearing and the more darkly charming Bundy is coming out. It's a very brief scene. Sorry, my phone got screwed up. He did do a good job with it, as did Joe Berlinger for recreating everything. Let's see. His first escape, the jump from the second story window of the courthouse for the library during a sentencing hearing. True. Except it shows the guard flirting with a girl that's there instead of, I think he had a smoke break or went to the bathroom. But it does show him jumping out of the second story window. He also says he has to call Liz, where I think he said he just wanted to go over his notes, his papers. And I really like how they portrayed it because, he has the interview with his beard, and it shows how calculating Bundy is, and it's trying to portray his intelligence, which, yes, Bundy is not the brilliant mastermind Hannibal Lecter that his legacy has kind of portrayed him to be. But the intelligence that this movie shows is not out of the realm of possibility. He has the interview with the beard that everyone saw, so he shaved it. Now he looks different. He's wearing this big cardigan. He's wearing all these extra clothes, which he was said to just pile on the clothes because he was planning on escaping to the mountains. But, he jumps. We see him run. It's a pretty intense scene. I imagine that's what it looked like. But then, he strips down his clothes to a different outfit, turns his cardigan inside out to look like a backpack, puts a headband on. He's a completely different person. So then it just shows, arrested again after 6 days, which that's how long he was free. Then we see him getting ready for his second escape, which also what it shows him jumping off his top bunk to strengthen up his calves for the jump. This shows him noticing this light in his cell. Then it shows him stealing a little saw blade so he can cut the fixture of the light out. It shows him doing it whenever, because he sees the light is actually the water heater for the showers. So whenever that's running, that's when he cuts it. And when it stops, he stops. Shows him taking it out, climbing through, and that's the most we see of it. Doesn't show him dropping down into the guards' locker room, changing and walking out. But we see him, then it says Florida 2 weeks later. Well, first it shows that he made the top 10 FBI's most wanted list, which is true. Then it shows Florida 2 weeks later. Also, another friend, I don't remember her name in this, but the friend that Liz is always with, I guess she's a composite character, but I think she's supposed to be more based. I read she was more based on her friend Marianne. I thought she was more based on her friend Angie, because Angie comes up a lot and seems to be her best friend in this. Because I was just remembering by this point she's dating Haley Joel Osment's character of Jerry, who again is a made-up character. So we see him, out drinking with women at a bar. Then we cut to actual news footage of the Chi Omega murders. Then we see him get pulled over again in a Beetle, which he did steal a Beetle. No mention of Kimberly Leach yet. But he did steal a Beetle. He was pulled over for driving. Shows him attacking the officer, then running. Which I think he pushes or punches the officer, then runs. Where in real life he tried to kick the officer's legs, then he ran, then he was tackled and pistol whipped. So then it shows him in jail in Florida. And the way they get the teeth imprints is a little excessive, because it shows them all coming in and like tackling him and holding him down to put the things in his mouth. It doesn't show him putting the clay in, but that's what they're doing. In real life, he just kind of sat there. And then when they said, well, we have a search warrant for your mouth, which is true, they did. And it was a guy named Ken, where I remember Ted just kind of sat there and he's like, Ken, I'm not a violent guy. Like, he was more cooperative in real life when they said we have the warrant to get it. Where in this, they held him down like he was a crazy person. One of the slight exaggerations of the film. They recreate the press conference where he's in the blue jumpsuit, and I think it's the warden is reading off the charges, I think it is, and Buddy's just kind of walking around scoffing. He's like, I'll plead I'll plead not guilty right now. And they go into verbatim, you kept me away from the press. You got to talk to the press. It's my turn to talk now. I will be heard. I will be heard. That's all pretty verbatim. Mannerisms are very similar. I say he is a little bit more cocky than Bundy sometimes. A lot of times, even in this footage, Bundy seems very kind of cold and blank. So then we see his Florida attorney, Dan Dowd, who's based on the real attorney, Mike Minerva, but he eventually got fired, which Bundy did fire him. He didn't say fuck you to him in court, like the movie shows. It talks about the plea deal, where if he pleads guilty, he'll get 75 years or life instead of the death penalty. Shows him refusing to take it, which is true. Say it's the first televised murder case, which is true. We do get a quick montage of... They do a good job at making it look fuzzy and grainy like it's the 70s, but you can tell it's 2019 actresses. Some of it is verbatim, I don't think he doesn't look like someone that would kill someone. So, well, it's kind of scary he's wanted for murder, but he is kind of dreamy. And, he's good looking. I don't think he would kill anybody. Showing all of his groupies or his admirers. Shows Carol Ann Boone moving from either Washington or Utah. I think she's from Seattle. Yeah, she was from Seattle. But she had gone to parties at Ted's house in Salt Lake City when he lived there. She uproots herself, moves to Florida, becomes his main support. It shows how they're talking about ways to win over the public because she can talk to the press. A lot of stuff that she says to the media is verbatim of what footage of Carol Ann Boone. The first day of trial was July 1st of 78. I believe that to be true. John Malkovich plays Judge Edward Cowart. That's his real name. So Jim Parsons, Sheldon, describes the Chi Omega murders very accurately, with, I think, real photos from it. I'm not going to get into the details, but he does describe Chi Omega murders very accurately. It shows Bundy proposing to Carol Ann Boone while she's on the witness stand. She says yes. That was true. He did, and it was on the day of the jury's verdict, as depicted in this. It says that the jury deliberated for 7 hours, which they did. And then it shows Liz in a flashback talking to Jerry why she feels guilty. And it shows how she gave his name to police after Lake Sammamish, which is, that whole account is very minimalized to the real account as told in the book. Carol Ann Boone says that she's pregnant, which it shows them bribing a guard so they can have sex during a visit. She says she's pregnant. Now, this is true, but the timeline isn't, because she did give Bundy a daughter while he was on death row, but she was conceived in 82 and born in October, so doesn't quite make sense. So then we get all the final statements. His mother, Louise Bundy, her statement is verbatim to the footage that you can find. Judge Cowart's final statement of, well, even the title, Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile, is how he describes these murders. But the whole thing where he says, you're a bright young man. You would have been an excellent lawyer. I would love to see you practice, but you went another way, partner. Take care of yourself. I mean that. Take care of yourself. I have no animosity towards you. It's I think a shame and the complete waste of humanity that we've witnessed today. That's all pretty much verbatim. And then Bundy's "won't ask for mercy" closing statement it's longer, it's a bit more Hollywood, but it's pretty close to verbatim. Only Bundy gave that statement before the verdict was read, not after, as the film portrays. And so then we cut to 10 years later, which is, this scene back at the beginning of the movie where she admits, I gave your name to police. He admits, which she has photos of, I'm guessing Donna Manson, which I'm not quite that far in the book yet, so I don't know if that's true. And she asks, what happened to her head. He keeps denying it, but then finally writes on the steam on the window, hacksaw, where we don't see the hacksaw, but we get this slow motion as he's writing it out. This flashback of him, arm in a sling, hitting her with a crowbar, putting her in the car, dragging her into the woods. And again, it is some of the best, as far as it looks, as far as he looks, hair, wardrobe, just the way everything looks and the way it's executed, is one of the best Bundy murders to be put in a movie. And it does kind of make you think, what would that movie be like? But I still really appreciate this approach to it. Then she leaves, and that's when we see Mike Fisher come in. It implies he's getting ready for all these confessions. It's days before his execution. And then we just get end text where it says, he was executed January 24th of 89. He confessed to all these murders. Carol Ann Boone gave birth to a daughter. Liz and Molly still reside in Washington. She's been sober for decades. And then we get all the real footage of Bundy or Cowart and everyone else that they've recreated for the film. And that's the movie. So yeah, it's very accurate to the real thing, which you kind of have to expect from a not only a documentary filmmaker, but the same guy that did the Ted Bundy tapes, which is one of, if not my favorite, Ted Bundy documentary. Again, I can't wait for that to come in. I've seen it already, but I can't wait for it to come in. So yeah, I definitely like this approach. I mean, I don't feel it's a very good adaptation of this book because it does cut a lot out of his and Liz's relationship. It does kind of diminish not so much her importance, but really her character in this film. And then in the second half, it becomes more of a latter half biopic Ted Bundy movie, at least for the trials on. But it's it's in depth for the stuff that it covers. Very well acted, very well shot. I'm most impressed with Efron and Kaya Scodelario as far as looks. The performances are very good, but those two specifically, their looks for looking like their real life counterparts are, amazing. I was fighting over the word stunning or amazing, but so yeah, definitely one of, if not the best Bundy movie. It's a tie for The Deliberate Stranger. I think they're both. I think they're both number one, but for different reasons. Now, anyone that just flat out says that this movie is not good because we don't see any of the murders except for that final scene, that's just a surface level true crime fan that probably only got into Ted Bundy or interested in Bundy when this came out and it came to their attention. I like this approach. It was different. I mean, even The Deliberate Stranger, which tries to kind of not show the murders, it's more of a gradual thing where you even see the Chi Omega kills. But this, turning the viewer into someone watching at home in 1978, and even giving it to us through the eyes of his girlfriend, really was a smart approach. And it really works for Efron's performance because there were times when I was watching this, especially the first time, where I was like, I could almost see why someone would buy his innocence. I almost wonder, like, what if he was innocent, even though I knew better? But Bundy had to put on a performance for the whole world, so now Efron has to kind of prove to the audience member who already knows about Bundy that he's innocent. So it works more for his performance as well. But it works for the structure of the film to not come out and show a murder and show his guilt up until that very end, right before his execution, when he's about to confess to everyone else and put it in public record. So, yeah, I enjoyed this film 3 years ago when I first saw it. I might have had some slight issues with it, but I definitely appreciate it more now, especially being about halfway through The Phantom Prince. But, yeah, I do like it more now. Highly recommend it if you haven't seen it already. Just don't go into it thinking you're going to get like a Michael Riley Burke, Ted Bundy slasher film, because it's much more than that. That's not the point of the film. And yeah, it's very well made. So that's the only re-review that I'm going to do for this run-through. It's just because I managed to pick it up and I wanted to see it again. But I do have a small handful of serial killer films left, so sorry this video is so long. There was a lot to cover for this film because it's so accurate. But so I apologize for the length, But stay tuned for the others that are coming, and thank you for watching.